Alright, so on my Facebook is a history of police violence and corruption. Years of it in Chapel, Nebraska, in Boulder, Colorado, and elsewhere. A history of politics utilized to separate us as a union. The black people in their group, the immigrants in their group, the women in their group, each one vying for their own individual rights instead of basic human rights for all of us. Every one of these groups turning a blind eye to the homeless, who comprise all of these groups. Now, if you can tell from the evidence against Alicia Bollinger, Natalie Bollinger, and Ted Bollinger, these people are the people I said they were. The drugs, the guns, the violence. Same thing with the police. Hospitals, when you go in as a homeless person, you can't tell them you're homeless. They'll treat you like a junkie. You're a meal ticket. You are free tax dollars. Now then there's the part where we have police across the entire United States taking part in child pornography. Not just the police, but also the foster care system. Not just the foster care system and the police, but also who? Child Protective Services. Let that sink in. Child Protective Services. There are doctors, lawyers, teachers, and judges nationwide involved in this. It's not just a conspiracy. Now, when you go into a hospital and you're telling them some crazy story about the police, these hospitals, first of all, you're homeless. You must be a junkie. So therefore, you must be lying. Assumed guilt at every corner. In addition, there's the fact that this harassment against me is well documented. Well documented. Unfortunately, it has been ignored by law enforcement and the courts. Meanwhile, the public, the Bollingers, and their cronies, as well as police officers, are well entrenched in making sure that this evidence never comes to light. My technical inabilities, and also the maze that has been created when you try to turn in a police officer, where they play stupid. Oh, you need a police officer for what? Going to the police to have them investigate themselves is the wrong thing to do. Now, how did this all come about? Well, first of all, the drug war is a complete and total failure. Why is this? Well, because those drug addicts, most of them were created in the system, growing up on opiates. Now, when you go in to tell on a police officer, they transfer you out of jurisdiction to a hospital where your guilt is assumed as soon as you walk in the door. These officers will drive you out of jurisdiction to that hospital when there is a hospital within their jurisdiction that you could be taken to. And then the officers in that jurisdiction, the help that you've been trying to get all along, well, now they take you out of jurisdiction, refuse to take your report, and then charge you with a crime, and then this other jurisdiction will help you to leave, knowing that you won't have the money to return, but at least you are safe from those police officers. But they're going to hold court without you. They're going to charge you with failure to appear. But then there's the drugs that you, growing up in the system, are now addicted to. You have a chemical dependency because of what the government has done to you. And this is a complicated thing to deal with. Everywhere I go, people say, oh man, meth here is bad. There is so much meth here. Meth here is terrible. And then there's selective cities like Seattle, Washington, Tacoma, Washington, Boulder, Colorado, Denver, Colorado, where heroin is the infatuation of the day. Heroin addicts, most of the heroin addicts that I know didn't start off on heroin. They started off with a back injury. What do the doctors keep trying to give me for my back injuries? That's right, they keep trying to give me opiates. But then there's the chemical concoctions that places like Clearview and Fort Logan will give you when the police take you in and you try to get a police officer there to take your report. Oh, sorry, it's out of jurisdiction, there's nothing we can do. Meanwhile, what we do to you in this place, like Clearview, is going to be allowed in other jurisdictions in those court dates. But you're never allowed to defend yourself. I was denied the right to a police officer everywhere I went. Every hospital that I went to denied a police officer. Now these doctors making decisions based off of your crazy stories that are well documented in the news that these officers are doing these things nationwide. Judges are taking part in it nationwide. And then we have people nationwide who are addicted to these drugs who complain about these drugs. They're complaining that they want to get clean, but they can't. And the police, now that America is completely saturated in these drugs, in these addictions, what do we do about it? We don't do anything because we're separated. Hundreds of people that I have spoken with have said, I'm sorry, Sean, I can't do anything. I'm just one person. That's right. But we, the people, are not just one person. We are many. But the Christians don't want to work with anybody who's not Christian, now do they? Does Black Lives Matter? Do they care about white people's lives? Do they care about Mexican lives or Canadian lives? Now, meanwhile, all of these groups that I see marching, Black Lives Matters, many of these women's liberation movements, these immigrant movements, you know who I see marching with all of them? White men. White men who have less personal rights than any of these groups. And yet these white men stand up and march with Black Lives Matters who doesn't care about them. Women's liberation movements that do not care about them. Immigrants' rights movements who do not care about them. Each of these groups blaming white males for all of their problems. Which white males did it? Is it the homeless man that you're taking it out on? Or is it your dad, your brother, your uncle? Or that corrupt police officer who assumed your guilt? Is your dad going to prison for raping you? Or is some homeless person taking the blame and filling in that spot to gain your tax dollars, while that predator walks free to do it again and again and again and again? We have seen time and again the police use the media to destroy people's lives. If the media said it, it must be true, and therefore this person must be guilty. And therefore it is okay for us to strip them of their basic human rights, their constitutional rights, the Bill of Rights. And it must be okay because the news said so. And the news has no accountability, do they? Not unless you're rich. Even then, has Donald Trump won any court dates against these media that he claims are biased against him? What about when that very same media and the FBI and the police, what happens when they do wrong things to the homeless? Some of whom are black, some of whom are immigrants, some of whom are Native Americans, some of whom are women. But they don't matter, do they? When there's a situation where somebody is harmed by corrupt police and corrupt police departments, and their family is in their corner and stands up and says, hey, this is messed up, you need to do something, the media may look at both sides. But in the case of the homeless, they will not. They will not. The media only takes the side of the police when it comes to the homeless. Sometimes they'll make a generalized article about how homeless people are treated. Sometimes. But for the most part, the media, just like Donald Trump, has a bias against the poor. Why is this? Well, because the people who control that media are rich people, just like Donald Trump. And we have all of these drugs and all of this separation of we the people. I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it. I know you can't. It's because you're afraid, because you think you're alone, which results in cowardice. Darren O'Connor, he told me that what was done to me was completely wrong, but that no lawyer is going to take my case because it's too complicated. Ah, yes. That's a very true statement. Meanwhile, we use wars abroad and send Americans abroad to fight for our rights. What rights? If those rights don't apply to women, don't apply to black people, don't apply to immigrants, and don't apply to white men, then who do they apply to? And why are these soldiers fighting elsewhere? It's to keep you looking elsewhere, to keep you looking away from the homeless and how they're treated, keep you looking away from children in the foster care system and how they are treated. Meanwhile, people like me who don't use methamphetamines and don't mess around with heroin and don't drink alcohol, we are told by people who cope with these issues, with the feeling of being alone, with the feeling that they can't do anything about it. They cope with it by doing what? More sinning, more drugs, more alcohol, and sex while on drugs and alcohol, because it makes you feel better. It makes you feel better. Temporarily. It also wastes your time. It wastes your resources. Resources that could be utilized making sure that your children have a better future. You have to fight for that future instead of saying, oh, well, I can't do anything about it. All I can do is teach my child to be a better person than I. You can't do that. You can't. Your children learn from your example. They will spout the same lies that you spout at them, but they will commit the same acts that you commit. So you try to hide your wrongdoings from your children, and when they find out, they resent you, do they not? Of course they do. Then there's the tactics of stalling. Stall tactics. You need to talk to a police officer. It's urgent. It's an emergency. So they give you an officer who says, well, I'm going to be on vacation for the next 2 days, or I'll be on vacation for the next week. Why would they assign an officer to that case who's going on vacation? Why would they do that? Incarceration. When you're incarcerated, there are a lot of things about incarceration that prevent an honest person from having an honest day in court because they're broke. A drug dealer who sold half a pound of methamphetamines can walk free because he has the money for bail. But a homeless man who is in there because a police officer saw an easy victim, he doesn't have money for the telephone, so he has no access to call anyone to help him. Because he's in jail, they don't allow him access to his court paperwork at all. Even in court, I had to sneak a look at my paperwork to see the things that Kara Johnson Miles said. I've requisitioned the evidence and the paperwork from all of my court dates while in Arapahoe County. And to this day, they've not shown up. Why is that? I let Pamela Carty know and her superiors know that that needs to be sent to me repeatedly, and it has not. My public pretenders refused to speak to me. They did this across not just multiple counties, but multiple states. And I'm not the only person it's been done to. Meanwhile, we are primed for foreign invasion. We are primed to get our asses kicked because we are a divided union. Who are these foreign invaders? Rich people. Rich people who bought our government to line their pockets. To line their pockets with the destitute, with the desperate, with the poor. Take a look at the 13th Amendment. That's the amendment to the Constitution that was introduced before the end of the Civil War, that made it legal for anyone convicted of a crime to be used as slave labor. Meanwhile, there are people, hundreds of people, who are railroaded in court because their public pretenders won't do anything. So they sit and they rot. And they can't pay their rent. They can't feed their children because an officer saw an easy victim. How many times has Ted Bollinger walked free? How many times has Alicia walked free? These are the dangerous people. The people on the drugs, the people with the firearms, the people going on high-speed chases with the police. Meanwhile, if I don't have vehicle insurance, I am afraid to drive. Because if an officer tries to pull me over, I will pull over. I will do the right thing. I will do my best to comply. Then again, if that officer expects me to comply to an unlawful order, he's got another thing coming to him. I am fighting a war on multiple fronts. But I believe in fighting a war without killing, without physical violence, without bringing physical harm upon others. What Alicia Bollinger did, she's not the only person who did this. She is not the only person who is afraid of what she has done. She is not the only person who copes by using drugs. Shannon does the same thing. Brett does the same thing. Amber does the same thing. Even where I'm at today, to some small degree, the lady I'm staying with uses alcohol to cope. But you know what? She does it differently now. When I lived with Brandon Jepson, he had 1 beer per day. That's what he rationed. It's the same thing here. So is it really a coping mechanism? Because it's not enough to get you drunk. Nearly everywhere that I go, people tell me that their town is one of the worst towns in America as far as meth goes per capita. That really says something, doesn't it? Meanwhile, are the jails full of meth heads? No, they're full of homeless. They're full of people who grew up in the system being force-fed medications. And as an adult, the same thing happens. You don't want to do drugs. You go into a hospital. The hospital treats you like you're a druggie. But then, they force more drugs into you. This is their cure for everything. Take this pill. Take this pill, it will fix your problems. Take this pill, your life will be well. Take these drugs. The government says it's okay, therefore it must make you better. But what if it doesn't? There are hundreds of people that I have been in contact with. Hundreds of comments on the internet, on YouTube videos, about many of the problems that I face, that many of you face, where people speak out about those drugs and how they don't work, but how they continue to take them, even though they make them sick, make them depressed, make them violent, make them act on suicidal thoughts, because it makes their family happy. My family won't talk to me unless I take these drugs. Well, all right then. That is the state of our union. We, the people, need to stand together, or your children have no future. You have less rights today than your parents had 20 years ago. Your parents had less rights 20 years ago than their parents had 20 years before that. Less rights for we, the people. But then we have progressive individual rights. Individual rights that create more division. Individual rights that many people, including minorities, are against. Like affirmative action. Affirmative action doesn't actually help anyone. It creates a divide. It creates a scenario where people are now pissed off because somebody else is getting special rights. When we, the people, should all have those rights. Well, you know, you're a white man. We need to focus on minority rights. You need to sit on the back burner and just take it. We need to focus on women's rights. You need to sit on the back burner and just take it. Get to the back of the bus. White man, get to the back of the bus. White man, get to the back of the line. You're poor. We don't care about you. You're homeless. Nobody cares about you. And that's where sin comes in. Safety in numbers. Many of the things that you guys complain about that happen to black people, or happen to women, or happen to any of these other groups, there are black people and women who are homeless. In Boulder, Colorado, black people are arrested at a 5-to-1 ratio over their white counterparts. Per capita, that is. However, the homeless are arrested at a 343 to 1 ratio over their housed counterparts. These people get railroaded in court. Arapahoe County has a 97% rate of people pleading out. Because these people are afraid of losing everything, or have already lost everything. They know that they're not going to get an honest day in court. They know that the odds are stacked against them, that their public pretender will not lift a finger to help them, will, matter of fact, put on a show and pretend anything to get these people to plea out. Oh, well, that's not my job, and then you get released after you have been forced to sign a piece of paper under torture and duress, alleviating these people of their illegal and immoral actions. And then magically it's okay. because you signed that piece of paper. It's all magically okay. Everything that they did, or rather did not do, that they were supposed to, is all magically okay because of that 97% rate where people are too poor, too homeless, too black to have actual basic human rights and access to the Constitution of the United States of America. There is a reason that I tried to fire every lawyer that I had. Because they will not do their jobs when it comes to a homeless person, especially after the media had a monkey trial. What's a monkey trial, might you ask? Well, it's like a kangaroo court without the court. There's no court involved. The media says, so it must be true. And the media has no accountability. They can say whatever they want. And meanwhile, you've got people like Jennifer Dujowski, who's only out for a meal ticket. You've got people like Mike Boudet, who isn't out for a meal ticket. He's out for attention. Not attention to bring light to an issue that is ongoing, but attention to spread his brand of hatred. Hatred towards the homeless, hatred toward the mentally disabled, hatred toward women. This man is a misogynist. When I was growing up, I called them dominant male monkey pig dogs. Meanwhile, women, same as men, will do anything for pretty. That man is prettier than I am. I must have it. Are you for certain about that, lass? Of course you're not. You'll go back to that man repeatedly, who beats you. And you will throw away the man who has rescued you repeatedly. Nice guys finish last. Good men are ignored and take the punishment for the things that your father did to you, that your brother did to you, that your uncle did to you. And what's their solution to the drug problem? The drug and housing problem. To drug you up and lock you up for needing help. We're not talking about a bunch of junkies on the street here. We're talking about addicts in houses. Addicts like Danica Garner, Rochelle Shelley Campbell, Ted Bollinger, Alicia Bollinger, Rose M. Kelly. Addicts in houses. Shannon, also an addict. But none of these people want to admit to it. Now, I've seen the Bollingers' pages. Most of them now admit to their addictions. They have to. They couldn't hide it any longer. Now then there's people like Amy Witcher and Andrew Witcher who are doing drugs, cocaine and methamphetamines. Amy Witcher herself admitted that Andrew got her addicted to cocaine, but did Andrew get her addicted to cocaine? Did Andrew force her to take that? Of course not. I even have messages from her where she is admitting that Andrew forced himself upon her sexually on multiple occasions. And yet she sticks up for him. Why? Because she doesn't want to be alone. Why does Alicia side with her family? Because she doesn't want to be alone. Why did Natalie side with her family? Because she didn't want to be alone. They just want to be loved. But it's the wrong way. Ba-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na